Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in America estimate that 1 in 6 children have got a developmental disorder. 1 in 33 boys have got an autistic spectrum disorder. That is an alarming level of disease.
When I graduated in 1973 with my undergraduate degree, I never saw someone on the autistic spectrum, and we treated all of Denver. When I graduated in 1982, the Callier Center for Communication Disorders didn't even have a population of autism. That was the elite place to go if your child had a problem. When I taught in 1990, I saw my first autistic child, and now I would say my caseload is 7/8 autism.
I don't agree that it's a difference in diagnosis. I'm surprised anyone who has been around autistic children would think that we'd be able to miss a diagnosis.
The truth is, these children are, in essence, so dysfunctional, it's unrealistic to think they made it through our system undetected.
No one even knew what it was 50 years ago. It was such a rare disorder.
A basic science rule taught to me in medical school: you cannot have an epidemic of any type of a genetic or developmental disorder. It is impossible. There are no exceptions to that rule. You would think that that alone would trigger our system to start investigating what else could be going on here.
If we remove ourselves from the idea that autism is this incurable disorder, that these kids can't possibly get better, and we actually look and see, is there an explanation for what's happening with them? The answer is yes.
Every child comes into this world with a unique capacity for handling the ever-growing number of toxins all over our planet. Our genes, our genomic profile, help shape the way we handle our environmental stressors and how they impact our well-being.
Actually, mom and dad, in almost all these situations, very bright, very successful people. All of a sudden, boom, they got a kid with autism, and they go back and say, there's nobody with autism in our family.
So there's no simple genetic cause for the problem, but there are a whole host of genes that may play a role.
So these are very common genomes that are out there. The only reason that these genomic factors stay in the DNA is because they actually confer advantage. When you have one of these genes, you may be less likely to get cancer. You may have more energy. You may have a higher IQ.
They may indeed have, in the past, have been advantageous genes that helped us respond to infection. But for some reason, because we've changed the environment, we've turned them from being one thing into another. Now they're susceptibility genes.
One doesn't necessarily have to end up with autism if you have all those underlying genetic susceptibilities. But if you're not aware of them, and then we have the other factors that are piled on top of it, that's when we end up with the children that I'm working with.
Some genes may be strong enough on their own to lead to autism, but in many cases it would require genetic vulnerability and environmental triggers for autism to develop.
These environmental triggers are different for each individual, but they're picking on the same genomic vulnerability factors.
If we just look at the number of chemicals in our environment, it's changed tremendously over the past few decades.
If you have chemicals floating around in your body that get into your brain, they can affect the brain and how the brain functions, similarly to how if you get drunk, your brain doesn't work right.
We've had some parents who had to have their houses termite tinted. Went away for 2 days, came back. Within 2 weeks, they had an autistic kid. We've had parents who had a house that became infected with black mold. Their child declined.
There's a subset of children who either genetically or environmentally are predisposed to not being able to handle these toxins that perhaps other children can.
Children born today have mothers with levels of pollutants in their bodies that are alarmingly high. The children themselves have levels of toxins that are higher than we ever suspected.
NIHANES, which is the NIH study that looks at this, says that about 1 in 10 children in this country is at risk for mercury toxicity based on maternal blood levels and maternal exposures and childhood diets.
It may well be that antecedent exposure to toxic metals such as mercury influence the immune system in a way that makes them unable to clear viral or parasitic infections. So
we know that it can change the immune system in such a way to make a virus that would normally be cleared become a chronic viral infection. That's clearly documented in the literature.
We will fight whether the viruses are creating a condition, but at least at this point, I think the more logical position is going to be that they are taking advantage of a stressed immune system and then add into the pathology.
So we know that viruses are challenging to the immune system. Are they the only challenge to the immune system? No, there's innumerable challenges to the immune system. Mm-hmm.
We realize that changing the gut flora of either the infant or the mother by the use of antibiotics really changes that innate programming of the immune system.
Back 30 years ago, we had penicillin and amoxicillin, and that was it. Now we have these incredibly high-powered antibiotics, so that we're developing these super-resistant organisms. Kids are sometimes needing to take 2, 3, 4 courses of antibiotics to kill an ear infection, which therefore will allow these things to grow.
If a sick child gets hit with either chemicals or immune factors, their blood-brain barrier may already be compromised in a way that allows chemicals or metals or infectious factors or immune factors to penetrate and alter the way the brain develops.
I see a number of pieces that need to come together simultaneously to create the situation of autism. We have chronic strep infection in many of these children. Strep infection triggers inflammatory mediators. Chronic viral infection and heavy metals also trigger additional inflammation. And so inflammation is a constant that runs through the entire process.
Using appropriate methods, scientists have identified signs of inflammation in the autistic brain, inflammatory cells and inflammatory chemicals. These findings suggest that something ongoing is happening in these brains related to the immune system.
All these pieces come together in such a way that we overwhelm the system.
Because what we heard over and over again, I had a normal kid. I can show you the pictures within days, weeks, months of some event. I lost my child.
We think it's a kind of like a multi-causal, very complex situation that involves the vaccines and toxins and maybe a genetic, susceptibility or fragility. What we worry about is we're teetering on this edge where we're going to lose a whole population of children. We're teetering on this edge. We're going to lose a whole population of children.